You'll never set foot on these grounds again." Diane's voice echoed across the vineyard, making the workers pause in their harvest preparations. I stood my ground, the morning sun warming my back as I faced my stepmother of 15 years. Her perfectly manicured hands were clenched into fists, her designer sundress a stark contrast to my dirt-stained jeans and work boots. "My name is Isabella Santos, and at 32, I was being thrown out of the vineyard I'd grown up in, the one my mother had built from nothing but determination and an inherited patch of land that everyone said was too rocky for grapes. These vines," I said quietly, reaching out to touch the nearest plant, its leaves dark and healthy under my fingers. "They're in my blood, Diane. You can't just." "Can't?" She laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Your father signed everything over to me last month. This is my vineyard now, and I won't have you undermining my authority with the workers. Always questioning my decisions, always bringing up how your precious mother would have done things differently." I thought about the changes she'd been making since Dad's stroke 3 months ago, replacing our longtime employees with cheaper labor, cutting corners on the aging process, planning to rip out the old heritage vines for more commercially popular varieties. Everything Mom had built, everything she believed in, Diane was systematically destroying. Dad would never. Oh, but he did. She pulled out a folded paper from her designer handbag, waving it triumphantly. "Full power of attorney and ownership transfer. While you were off taking that silly sommelier course in France, I was here, taking care of him, making him see reason about the future of Santos Vineyards." My stomach churned. I'd only been gone for 6 weeks, pursuing the certification Mom had always dreamed of getting herself. Dad had encouraged me to go, saying he was feeling stronger, that Diane would help with the harvest preparations. Now, Diane continued, smoothing her dress with practiced precision. "I want you off my property. Your little cottage needs to be cleared out by sunset. I have plans to convert it into a tasting room for premium customers." The cottage, my home since Mom died 12 years ago, the place where she taught me everything about winemaking, where we'd spent evenings planning expansions and improvements, dreaming about the future of our family legacy. "You can't do this," I repeated, but my voice wavered. The workers were watching now, particularly Miguel, our vineyard manager who'd been with us since I was a child. His face was dark with concern, but he couldn't risk his job. I knew he had 3 kids in college. Diane's smile widened. "Security will escort you out if necessary. Don't embarrass yourself, Isabella. You're just like your mother, so caught up in tradition and sentiment that you can't see progress when it's staring you in the face." I turned to look at the rolling hills covered in vines, each row meticulously planned by my mother years ago. The morning fog was just lifting, revealing the golden California sunshine that made our grapes so special. Mom used to say the fog was the vineyard's blanket, tucking in the vines each night and waking them gently each morning. "Fine," I said finally, surprising Diane with my calm. "I'll go, but remember what Mom always said about harvest season. Every vine remembers who truly loves it." Diane rolled her eyes. "More of your mother's superstitious nonsense. This is a business, Isabella, not a fairy tale. I'm going to turn Santos Vineyards into something profitable, something modern. No more of this small batch artisanal waste of time." I walked away, my boots crunching on the gravel path that led to my cottage. Behind me, I could hear Diane already on her phone, probably calling her interior decorator about gutting my home. But with each step, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. What Diane didn't know, what even my father didn't know, was that Mom had left me more than just her knowledge and love for the vineyard. The night before she died, she called me to her hospital room, pressing a sealed envelope into my hands. "Don't open it yet, my amour," she'd whispered, her voice weak, but her eyes bright. "Wait until the right moment when the vines tell you it's time." I kept that envelope all these years, tucked away in my mother's old wine ledger, waiting for a sign. Last night, for the first time since Mom's death, I dreamed of her walking through the vineyard during harvest, singing to the grapes like she used to. When I woke up, I knew it was time. Back in my cottage, I pulled out the ledger from its hiding place behind a loose board in the pantry. The envelope was still there, slightly yellowed with age but sealed tight. My hands trembled as I opened it, reading the contents twice to make sure I understood everything. Then I made 3 calls, one to our family lawyer, one to the county records office, and one to Antonio, my mother's oldest friend and the keeper of more secrets than anyone suspected. "It's time," Antonio asked, his voice grave when he answered. Yes, I replied, watching through my window as Diane paraded potential designers around the property. Mom knew this day might come. She prepared for it. She always was the smartest woman I knew. Antonio chuckled. The festival is in 3 months. Everything will be ready. I packed my essential belongings into my car, taking one last look at the cottage where I'd grown up. The walls were lined with photos. Mom teaching me how to test grape sugar levels, Dad and me celebrating our first award-winning vintage, the whole crew gathered for harvest dinners. As I drove past Diane, she was already measuring the cottage windows for new curtains. She gave me a smug wave, probably thinking she finally won, finally erased the last trace of my mother from Santa's vineyards. If only she knew what that envelope contained. If only she knew what harvest season would bring. Goodbye, Isabella, she called out mockingly. Do let us know if any restaurants need a waitress with wine knowledge. Since that's all you're qualified for now. I smiled, touching the envelope in my jacket pocket. See you at the Harvest Festival, Diane. Wouldn't miss it for the world. 3 months passed like honey dripping from a comb, slow, sweet, and purposeful. I moved into a small apartment in town, watching from afar as Diane systematically dismantled everything my mother had built. The cottage, my childhood home, was gutted and transformed into a gaudy tasting room that looked more like a Miami nightclub than a family vineyard. Through Miguel, who secretly kept me updated, I learned that Diane had ordered the heritage vines to be ripped out after the harvest. She signed a contract with Mega Wine Distributors. He told me during one of our clandestine meetings at the local diner. They want high-volume, commercial varieties. The old vines, he shook his head. They're scheduled for removal the day after the festival. The festival. The Santos Harvest Festival had been my mother's creation, a celebration that brought together the entire wine community. It was more than just a marketing event. It was a tradition that honored the land, the grapes, and the people who poured their hearts into each bottle. Diane predictably had turned it into an exclusive, high-ticket affair. Only the right kind of people. I overheard her telling her social circle at the grocery store. No more of that community picnic nonsense. This year, Santos Vineyards enters the luxury market. What she didn't know was that I'd been busy too. Antonio and I had spent weeks in careful preparation, working with the family lawyer to ensure everything was in perfect order. The documents my mother had left me weren't just papers. They were a masterpiece of foresight and legal precision. The morning of the festival arrived with the same fog that had blanketed our vineyards every harvest season for generations. I dressed carefully in my mother's old festival outfit, a simple white dress with hand-embroidered grapevines along the hem, paired with comfortable boots made for walking the rows. Around my neck, I wore her pendant, a simple silver vine leaf that she'd never taken off. As I drove up to the vineyard, I could see the transformation Diane had wrought. Giant white tents dotted the property, valets and matching uniforms waited to park luxury cars, and a string quartet played bland background music where the local bands used to perform. The security guard at the gate, a new hire who didn't know me, checked his list with a frown. Sorry, miss. This is a private event. Invitation only. Oh, I have an invitation. I smiled, handing him an envelope. Inside was a copy of the document that would change everything. His eyes widened as he read it, then quickly waved me through. I parked in my usual spot behind the main building, knowing Diane would hate seeing my modest car among the luxury vehicles. The festival was already in full swing, with well-heeled guests sipping wine and pretending to understand its complexity. I spotted my father first, sitting in his wheelchair near the main tent. He looked smaller somehow, diminished as Diane paraded him around like a prop. The stroke had affected his speech and mobility, but his eyes, they still held the same warmth they always had. Isabella, he managed to say as I approached, his face lighting up. Before I could reach him, Diane materialized between us, her face twisted with anger. I thought I made myself clear, she hissed, grabbing my arm. You're not welcome here. Security. Actually, I said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, I have every right to be here. I gently pulled free of her grip and walked to the small stage where the quartet was playing. With a gesture, they stopped and the confused murmur of the crowd drew everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying across the grounds just as my mother had taught me. Welcome to Santos Vineyards. My name is Isabella Santos, and I'm so glad you could join us for this year's Harvest Festival. Diane stormed toward the stage, her face red with fury. "Security, remove her immediately." "I wouldn't do that," Antonio's voice rang out as he emerged from the crowd, followed by our lawyer and a county official. "Not unless you want to be charged with attempting to remove the legal owner of Santos Vineyards from her own property." The silence that fell over the gathering was absolute. Even the birds seemed to pause their songs. "What nonsense is this?" Diane demanded, but I could see the first flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I pulled out my mother's envelope, now containing certified copies of the documents that had waited 15 years to be revealed. My mother, Elena Santos, was many things: a visionary vintner, a beloved member of this community, and above all, a careful planner. The lawyer stepped forward, his voice professional and clear. When Elena Santos inherited this land from her family, she set up a generational trust. While portions of the vineyard's operation could be transferred or sold, the land itself and final operational control were placed in a locked trust that would pass to her daughter, Isabella, upon either her 30th birthday or in the event someone attempted to make fundamental changes to the vineyard's heritage operations. I watched the color drain from Diane's face as she realized what this meant. Her power of attorney, her ownership transfer, they were meaningless against my mother's carefully crafted trust. "The contract you signed with Mega Wine Distributors," I continued, "and your plans to remove the heritage vines triggered the transfer clause. As of this morning, I am the sole owner and operator of Santos Vineyards." The county official stepped forward, holding up additional documents. "We've recorded the transfer. It's official and irreversible." Dad was wheeling himself forward, tears in his eyes. He reached for my hand, squeezing it weakly. "Elena," he whispered, looking at me with a mixture of pride and regret. So much like Elena. Diane stood frozen, her perfect world crumbling around her. The guests were whispering, phones were recording, and her carefully orchestrated luxury event was transforming into something else entirely, a moment of justice. "You can't," she finally managed. "You can't just take it all away." I stepped down from the stage, approaching her with the same calm dignity my mother had always shown in difficult moments. "I'm not taking anything away, Diane. I'm preserving what was meant to be preserved. The heritage vines stay. The traditions stay. The heart of Santos Vineyard stays." I turned to the crowd, raising my voice once more. "And in that spirit, I invite everyone, not just those on the guest list, but everyone in our community, to join us for a true Santa's Harvest Festival. The gates are open, the local bands are on their way, and the wine." I smiled, touching my mother's pendant. "The wine remembers who truly loves it." As if on cue, the morning fog began to lift, revealing the rows of vines stretching into the distance, their leaves glowing gold in the emerging sunlight. Just as they had every harvest season, just as my mother had always said they would. The transformation of the festival happened as naturally as grapes ripening on the vine. Within hours, the string quartet was replaced by local musicians playing lively harvest songs. The pretentious wine tasting stations gave way to long tables filled with homemade food brought by community members. Children ran between the vines, playing the same games I had played decades ago. Diane had disappeared, retreated to the main house in fury and humiliation. But her absence only seemed to make the vineyard breathe easier, as if the land itself was celebrating its return to proper hands. Miguel approached me, carrying 2 glasses of our heritage wine, the last bottles from my mother's final vintage. To Elena, he said, his eyes glistening. "She would be proud, Isabella, not just of what you did today, but how you did it." I took a sip, letting the complex flavors bring back memories of working alongside my mother, learning to taste not just the wine, but the story in each glass. "We have work to do," I said. "The harvest starts next week, and we need to rebuild what's been damaged." "The crew never left, you know," Miguel smiled. "We've been keeping the old methods alive, doing things Elena's way whenever Diane wasn't watching. The vines remember, just like your mother always said." Dad's nurse wheeled him over to join us. His speech was still impaired, but his eyes spoke volumes as he reached for my hand. I knelt beside his wheelchair, remembering all the times we'd walked these roads together. "I'm sorry," he managed to say, a tear rolling down his cheek. "Should have known better." "It's okay, Dad," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Mom knew this might happen. That's why she prepared. She wasn't just protecting me or the vineyard, she was protecting you too." The festival continued into evening, fairy lights twinkling in the trees just as they had in years past. Antonio gathered everyone for the traditional harvest blessing, speaking the same words my mother had spoken every year. To the land that gives us life, to the vines that give us purpose, to the community that gives us strength, salud. Salud, the crowd responded, glasses raising under the starlit sky. Later that night, after the last guests had left and the cleanup was underway, I walked the rows of heritage vines that had so nearly been lost. These plants, some older than I was, had witnessed everything: my mother's triumphs, her passing, Diane's betrayal, and now this return to tradition. I found Diane's contract with Mega Wine Distributors in the office and fed it through the shredder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: legal paperwork to file, accounts to audit, relationships to rebuild. But tonight was for remembering and reconnecting. In my cottage, now stripped of Diane's gaudy renovations, I found one last surprise. Behind a panel the decorators had covered but not removed, Mom had left another envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just days before she died. My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, then the trust has been activated and you've taken your rightful place at Santos Vineyards. I know it couldn't have been easy, waiting and watching while others tried to change what we built. But like the best wines, some things take time to reach their perfect moment. Remember that a vineyard is more than land and vines. It's a connection between past and future, between earth and sky, between people who share a love for something greater than themselves. You understand this in your heart, just as I did. Take care of the heritage vines, my amor. They're our family story written in soil and sunlight. Take care of our people, they're the soul of this place. And most importantly, take care of yourself. You are my greatest vintage, my most precious creation. The wine remembers who loves it, and the land knows its true keeper. With eternal love, Mama. I folded the letter carefully, touching my mother's pendant. Outside, the first stars were appearing, the same stars that had washed over Santos Vineyards for generations. Tomorrow would bring a new day, a new chapter in our vineyard's story. Miguel had arranged for the old harvest crew to return at dawn. The heritage vines were heavy with grapes, ready for picking. There would be new wines to make, new memories to create, and new traditions to blend with the old. As I prepared for bed in my childhood room, I heard a car start, Diane leaving with her belongings, finally accepting her defeat. But this wasn't about defeating anyone. It was about preserving something precious, something my mother had understood all along. The wine remembers who loves it, and Santos Vineyards would continue to thrive, rooted in tradition but growing toward the future, just as Mom had planned all along. I opened my window, letting in the night air rich with the scent of ripening grapes. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, the same sound that had served as my childhood lullaby. The vineyard was alive, awake, and finally back in the right hands. Tomorrow would begin my first harvest as the true keeper of Santos Vineyards. But tonight, I could almost hear my mother's voice in the rustle of grape leaves, singing her old harvest song, welcoming me home.